During the last couple of weeks, I tested the new Suunto Race, which is the company's first ever AMOLED watch, and even besides that we have some more exciting new features. The era of AMOLED displays has long begun, and more sports watches apply this display technology now as well, as Garmin with its Epix, Forerunner, Vivo Active or Venue watches, or Polar most recently with its new Vantage V3. The Suunto Race is essentially the AMOLED counterpart to the Suunto Vertical, similar to how Garmin handles its Epix and Phoenix lineup. I'm currently testing the Polar Vantage V3 as well, and both Polar and Suunto have in some way lost ground to its competitors like Garmin and Co. or smartwatch manufacturers like Apple or Samsung in the last years. However, everything is better with the Suunto Race, at least that's what the manufacturer says. So Suunto really aims to usher in a new era here. And in this video I will introduce you to all of the new features of the watch as well as all of its pros and cons so that you will know exactly whether it's a good choice for you. So let's get started. The first point we need to discuss here is the price, which is really interesting. In terms of its overall concept and functionality, it's the Forerunner 965 from Garmin and Polar's Vantage V3 that the Suunto Race must measure up to. However, these two watches cost around $600, while the Suunto Race already comes in at $450, which is of course not cheap, but in comparison to its competition, it pretty much is. The watch comes in two different versions. The $450 refer to the stainless steel version, while the titanium version costs $550. So Suunto is really challenging its competition. The watch really has many features for a watch under $500, and we will discuss all of these exciting new features in the course of this video. But let's start with the design and build of the watch. As I mentioned, depending on the model, stainless steel or titanium is used, which are both high quality and robust materials. The display is made of the particularly scratch and break resistant sapphire glass, which is not that common for watches in this price range. In terms of construction, the watch resembles Garmin's outer watches such as the Phoenix or Epix, although these watches are both twice as expensive. The functionally similar Forerunner 965, for example, is mostly made of plastic except for the bezel and also lacks sapphire glass. I chose the titanium version of the Suunto Race, in which the bezel, buttons as well as the back of the case are made of titanium. The watch is extremely robust, well crafted, and I personally really like this look, especially the slightly ridged bezel, but of course that's a matter of taste. In both versions, the watch has a case diameter of 49mm and a thickness of 13.3mm. The stainless steel version weighs 83 grams, while the titanium version is lighter at 69 grams. I have the titanium version, and even though it's the lighter variant, you can still feel it on the wrist. It's not the lightest or smallest watch out there, but it gives off the vibe of a typical outdoor sports watch. And even though this is something I personally really like, it is something you definitely should be aware of, especially if you have smaller wrists. From the outside, the watch is pretty similar to the Suunto Vertical. We still have the same three buttons on the right side of the case, but however you can also use a touchscreen of course. The difference is that the middle button is no longer a classic button, but a rotating crown, similar to what we saw on the Coros Apex Pro for example. I already liked this with the Coros back then, and I was happy to see it here as well, because it allows you to easily navigate through the menus, especially if you have sweaty hands. But speaking of navigating through the menus, the Suunto Race is still pretty slow and lags at some points. So this was one of my main criticisms for the Suunto Vertical, and it has become better with the Suunto Race, but it's still not at the level of Garmin watches or especially smartwatches like the Apple Watch. And the menu setup itself is also somewhat different. With the Suunto Vertical you had the widgets arranged side by side and you could only see one widget per screen. Ironically, however, the arrangement was not vertical, but it is now vertical in the Suunto Race, where you move from top to bottom through the widgets and you can now see up to 3 widgets per screen and click into a widget for further details. In my opinion, this is a better solution than before. Another thing I really like, which is probably the biggest, most important new feature of the Suunto Race, is the new colorful AMOLED display. AMOLED displays are much brighter, more colorful and have higher contrast, making them just more enjoyable to look at than the somewhat duller looking MIP displays used in all Suunto watches before, including the Vertical. The display is 1.43 inches with a resolution of 466 x 466 pixels and a maximum brightness of 1000 nits. This puts it on par with the competition, and overall the display is definitely one of the best and most pleasing updates compared to the Suunto Vertical. As a result, you can now also use a flashlight. So the watch doesn't have extra LEDs on the top of the case like the Garmin Fenix 7 Pro for example, but instead the display simply turns as bright as possible, allowing you to find your way in a dark room quite well. However, due to the new display technology, you don't have a solar lens here anymore. The Suunto Vertical had a solar charging lens in the titanium version, which could extend the battery life. This, however, is not present in the Suunto Race anymore, but speaking about battery life, this brings us to the next topic. The Suunto Vertical had an incredible battery life. According to Suunto, the watch can last up to 60 days in normal watch mode and during training, depending on the mode you choose, between 60 and 500 hours. Suunto offers 4 different modes: Performance, Endurance, Ultra and Tour. In Performance mode, all sensors and measurements run at full capacity, while in the other modes, the accuracy or the amount of sensors and measurements used is gradually reduced. According to Suunto, the race lasts up to 26 days in watch mode and up to 40 hours in training mode in the worst case, which is the Performance mode, and up to 120 hours in Tour mode. So the watch doesn't last as long as the Suunto Vertical anymore, which is mainly due to the new AMOLED display and the absence of the solar lens, but compared to other AMOLED watches, these numbers are still very impressive. So how does the battery life look like in practice? I usually use the performance mode, and during a 1-hour running session the Suunto Race consumes 2 to 3% of battery, aligning well with the specified 40 hours of battery life. On a regular day with approximately 1 hour of training recording, the watch consumes about 5 to 6% of battery, meaning it would roughly last for 20 days. This, as mentioned, is not quite at the level of the Suunto Vertical, but for a watch with an AMOLED display, the battery life is very, very impressive. Now that we've talked about many of the hardware related stuff like the display or the battery life, it's now time to look at the software, so the new features of the watch. Ultimately, the Suunto Race is of course once again a sports watch, so the focus is on the sports, fitness and health features. And if you already know the Suunto Vertical, much of this will sound very familiar to you because the Suunto Race is essentially just the AMOLED counterpart of the Vertical with some additional new features. In training mode, in addition to classics like running, cycling or swimming, there is also a multisport mode for triathletes, and you have a total of more than 95 training profiles available. And then during your training sessions you can use the Suunto Plus features again, where you can activate various additional features like the Ghost Runner mode, in which you can compete against a ghost created by your own initial pace. After training you can see the usual summary of key data such as average heart rate zones, altitude profiles, burned calories and so on. And in the app you can see all of this in more detail, including a detailed map, heart rate graphs and much more. You can even replay the route live. Besides the training mode itself, there are many more interesting widgets for athletes. Many of the features we know from Garmin and other sports watch manufacturers are available on the Suunto Race in a similar form and under different names. For example, there's the Resources widget, which is essentially similar to Garmin's body battery feature. It shows your remaining body energy reserves in a simplified way. The value depends on your training, recovery, stress level and also your sleep. So the Suunto Race of course also offers a sleep analysis, showing you how long you slept, your sleep quality, average heart rate and even measuring your blood oxygen level, as the watch has an SpO2 sensor as well. What's new is that the sleep phases are now also displayed directly on the watch, while previously you could only see them in the app. What's also new is that the watch can now also calculate your heart rate variability. This value has become more and more important during the last years and has luckily now also found its way onto the Suunto Race. Heart rate variability describes the regularity of your heartbeats and is a good indicator for stress or recovery. So now you can see your heart rate variability for the last 7 days, then the value from your last night, and based on that an HRV status such as recovery. In addition, there are some more very advanced widgets for athletes that try to help you find the right balance for your training or try to help you reach your goals faster. As a basis, after each of your workouts you get a training stress score or TSS value. Depending on the intensity and duration of the workout, this TSS value describes the load of the training on your body. This is based on factors such as your anaerobic threshold or your VO2 max value, which the watch can also calculate. And then based on all of these individual TSS values from your individual workouts, the watch then goes on to calculate your chronic training load or CTL. In essence, it's just an average of your TSS values and describes your chronic or long-term training status. So for example, if you train extremely intensively every day for 30 days, your chronic training load is obviously too high, indicating a state of overtraining. Here the watch will show you whether you are currently training too little, training just right or overtraining. And then finally there is also the TSB, which is the training stress balance. which is essentially just the ratio of your chronic and acute training load, which is something we also already know from Garmin. So here it's all about finding the right balance. You can really delve into all of this training science stuff in incredible detail, but that would really exceed the scope of this video. Personally, I love playing around with all of these values and parameters, adjusting my training and trying to get the maximum out of it, and with the Suunto Race you have all you need for that. So many of the very advanced training features we find on higher end Garmin watches, you will also find them on the Suunto Race, which is just impressive for a watch that is just coming in at $450. Another extremely important innovation of the Suunto Race is the offline maps. We first saw these with the Suunto Vertical, and fortunately this feature has now been adopted for the Race as well. So you now have topographic maps. Unlike Garmin, for example, there are no such things as street or trail names on the map, but you can still see all of the details of what's around you. The Suunto Race always shows a very useful section, and you can of course zoom in and out of the maps, which is very well done. You can download the maps via the app, you can choose from many different regions, and then you can always download the maps in 3 different styles, which is high contrast, outdoor and dark. The maps are very useful and a significant upgrade from previous Suunto watches, however the navigation features you can use these maps for are still very limited. You can use a back to start feature where either your route is reconstructed or just being a straight line to the starting point, but there is no routing itself on the watch, so you cannot create a new route directly on the Suunto Race. But of course you can plan your routes using Suunto's Route Planner or Komoot in advance. You can then load routes onto the watch and navigate based on them, receiving turn-by-turn directions and everything you need to complete the route. But like I said, you cannot create a new route directly on the watch, meaning that if you ever get lost with the Suunto Race, you can either just walk back the exact same way or have a straight line shown to the starting point. So there are still some drawbacks with these maps, but in general these new offline maps are still a huge upgrade of course. When it comes to GPS, the Suunto Race now also provides multiband, same as the Suunto Vertical before. Multiband means that multiple frequencies from multiple satellites can be accessed at the same time, which, at least in theory, leads to more accurate GPS recordings. We see this trend in more and more sports watches, and in many of my previous practical tests I have already demonstrated that multiband GPS is indeed slightly more accurate than regular GPS. With the Vertical, however, I achieved precise results both with and without multiband GPS enabled. So how does the Suunto Race perform in this regard? Here you can see one of my classic running routes, and here everything looks good. For instance, the watch's route doesn't cut through buildings, which can happen sometimes, it doesn't take shortcuts around corners, and the watch even recognizes when I switch sides of the street. However, for my testing purposes I also conducted my usual test in the forest. In this test I run the same narrow paths back and forth to ensure the routes ideally overlap. In this case the Suunto Race performs quite well. For comparison you can see the routes of the Apple Watch Ultra 2 in blue, the Suunto Vertical in green and the Garmin Fenix 7 Pro in yellow. As we can see there are no significant differences between the watches, all of them are very accurate. There's a slight deviation at one point, mainly from the Suunto Race, but overall I am very satisfied with its GPS accuracy as well. One last thing we have to discuss is the accuracy of the optical heart rate measurement. So the Suunto Race has the exact same optical heart rate sensor that was also built into the Suunto Vertical, which I am not particularly happy about because with this watch I couldn't really achieve accurate results. But new watch, new chance, so let's see how accurate the Suunto Race is. Here you can see some of my running sessions with Suunto Race data in blue and chest strap data in red. This illustrates a typical phenomenon with optical heart rate sensors. At the beginning, when my heart rate is rapidly increasing, the watch takes a few seconds longer to recognize this rise. After that it stabilizes and becomes very accurate. In this particular session I have no complaints, the accuracy was very good from start to finish. However, in the third session the Suunto Race did not track any heart rate data in the first 2 minutes. Nevertheless, it was very accurate once it started recording. Overall, I think that the accuracy during running is good. Now onto the more challenging aspect, namely strength training. Unfortunately, the results were not good at all here. We can observe that the chest straps curve consistently rises and falls steeply, reflecting the significant fluctuations in my heart rate during strength training. The Suunto Race, however, depicts a flatter curve, failing to accurately capture the heart rate increases. This makes the measurement less useful and the average heart rate deviates by almost 15 beats per minute. In 2 additional strength training sessions, the pattern remains similar. The watch simply doesn't keep up with the rapid heart rate increases. While my heart rate is ascending, the watch recognizes it a bit later, then the displayed heart rate on the watch rises. However, my actual heart rate is already decreasing during this time, so that the watch makes it fall as well, never reflecting the true maximum. Consequently, the curve is notably flatter, the average heart rate is too low, and the maximum heart rate is inaccurate as well. For strength training with the Suunto Race, I would definitely recommend using a chest strap. With Garmin and Polar watches, I achieved more accurate results, but so far the Apple Watch has been by far the most accurate in this regard. Alright, so what can we conclude about the new Suunto Race? First of all, I have to say once again that the price of this watch is truly incredible. It is very hard to find another watch with an AMOLED display being that robust and high quality, and especially having this many features for around $450 somewhere else. Probably it just doesn't exist. Comparable watches, like I said, are the Forerunner 965 from Garmin and Polar's Vantage V3, both of which are significantly more expensive. In my opinion, Suunto definitely has tons of potential. The watches are of high quality, the training metrics are sophisticated and meaningful, you have offline maps and now also a super nice AMOLED display. However, in my opinion, the manufacturer hasn't quite managed to put it all together seamlessly in terms of the software. The operation still feels a bit clunky, the navigation features are not quite refined, and especially the accuracy, particularly in terms of the heart rate monitoring, is not really good. Nevertheless, the overall package you get for this price is definitely impressive, and the watch finally is a real alternative to Garmin and others again. I'm definitely looking forward to what Suunto has in store for us for the upcoming years. But for now, let me know in the comment section down below what you think of the new Suunto Race. If you found this video interesting or helpful in any way, you could really support me and my channel here by giving this video a quick thumbs up. And if you don't want to miss any more videos in the future, like for example comparison videos of the Suunto Race to competitors like Garmin and Polar, you should definitely subscribe to this channel for free, of course. But for now, thanks a lot for watching and see you next time.